I want to begin with a story. Several years ago, an actor on a television show faced a dilemma. He was the star of a TV show that wasn't doing all that well in the ratings, but that was not the problem. This actor learned that an actress who also starred on the show was not being paid as much as the other male actors. Now, this actor was beloved by the fans, and so he had a lot of influence. So he went to the studio executives and used his influence to demand equal pay for this actress. And he was successful. The actress received pay equal to her male peers. The show was Star Trek. The actor was Leonard Nimoy, who of course played Spock, and the actress was Nichelle Nichols, who played Uhura. That's right, Leonard Nimoy was down for equal pay for equal work way before it was cool. In many ways, Nimoy found a defect in the system and he debugged it. By debugging the system, he furthered Nichols' position as an actress by giving her access to better pay. And I'm sure that Nichols was empowered to ask for equal pay in future acting roles, which further improved the system. All because Leonard Nimoy debugged diversity. Now, you may be wondering, what does this have to do with PuppetConf? Well, you may have heard that the software development industry is not very diverse. In fact, we suffer from a lack of diversity. Whether it's open source or closed source, whether we're deploying or developing code, the people working in software development don't reflect the general population, nor are rewards like pay, promotions, and positions of leadership equally distributed. We face the reality that a woman who has mastered tools like Puppet, GitHub, and Docker has less access to equal pay than an actress who worked on a failed TV show in the 1960s. However, I believe that Leonard Nimoy provided a model for how we can address this problem. Notice that Nimoy didn't wait for Paramount to roll out a diversity program, nor did he wait for a better salary policy to be handed down by his superiors. Nimoy acted based on his sense of what was right. Nimoy debugged his industry by leveraging his privilege as a male actor and as the star of the show to help Nichols, a fellow artist, participate in the financial benefits of the industry. And I think that there are a lot of Leonard Nimoys at PuppetConf. And I think that there are other ways to debug diversity and make technology a more diverse and a more inclusive industry. But before we do that, we have to understand the difference between diversity and inclusion. So let's say you're throwing a party and you want people to come to your house to attend the party. Diversity is sending invitations to the party. That's easy to do, right? You just pop them in the mail and you're done. It's just a numbers game. Inclusion goes further than diversity. Inclusion is making sure that your guests are not only invited, but they also feel welcome at your party. You understand that some people may have had a longer journey to get to your house than others, and so you're a little bit more welcoming and because they made the trip. Or you understand that some people may have food allergies, and so you make sure that there are other food options for those guests. Or maybe some of your invited guests don't drink alcohol, so you make sure that there are plenty of non-alcoholic options for those guests. That's being inclusive. Inclusion requires empathy, which simply means taking the time to understand that people are different. Diversity is all too easy to gain with symbolic gestures and meaningless numbers. Inclusion, that takes real effort. But I think it pays better dividends in the end. And as Leonard Nimoy realized, inclusion won't come from big companies. Big companies make good faith efforts and they really try to improve these numbers and improve the makeup of our industry. But I think we really need a grassroots effort of individual people making changes based on their sense of fairness. But we work in tech, right? And we have an advantage because, especially if we contribute to open source projects, we understand grassroots movements. I know Gene Kim is a well-known author. I know he's here at Puppet. He's written a lot of great books, and if you have a chance to go by his booth, I think they're signing copies, and I got the Phoenix Project last time I came to Puppet. But one of the earliest books on software development was called The Cathedral and the Bazaar by Eric S. Raymond. Now, we really don't think about it now, but this was written right after Linux really became mainstream. And we probably use Linux every day, but this was back in the trenches where you had this project, this crazy project, where you had this complicated kernel that you were trying to make work, and you were getting it to work with different devices and just to get a usable operating system. And so Eric Raymond compared closed source software development to a cathedral, right? There's central command and control, everything is locked down, to a bazaar, which is this loud, babbling market where power is distributed among many loud voices. And Raymond realized that the bazaar model, the open source model, actually produced better results. Now, the lesson that is most well known from this book is this one. Given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And I hope that you've heard of that phrase. You might not know where it came from, but it came from the cathedral and the bazaar. But I really like the more formal version of this, which says that given a large enough beta tester and co-developer base, almost every problem will be characterized quickly and a fix obvious to someone. That is a statement of inclusion. Raymond linked the size of the co-developer base, which is just simply developers, to problem solving. And what else is innovation but the ability to solve problems? If we let software development be this big tent, this babbling, boisterous bazaar of people who are involved in the development of software and dedicated to making it better, then I fully believe that there's no problem that we can't solve. And that is the promise of inclusion. But the sad reality is that just like our repositories are protected by passwords and permissions, often our companies are protected by privilege. And there are voices that we keep out of the bazaar because we don't create a place for them to take part in our projects and in our companies. And there are certain groups that have a hard time lending their voices to this babbling bazaar that Raymond described because they lack privilege. And this is really tragic because I fully believe that no matter what problems you have in your company, whether in your source code or how you ship product, there's someone out there who can fix your problems. But all too often, these people are denied access. However, if you've taken the time necessary to learn the skills that you need to debug software as a software developer or even on an ops team, you probably already have the tools you need to remove the diversity defects in software development and improve the industry. Now, the software debugging techniques that you already know can be directly applied to improving diversity in tech. And I want to talk about 4 debugging techniques that I'm sure we've all used before, and they are expected behavior, tracing, refactoring, and sample code. So let's look at them one at a time. Now, I'm the program manager for several development and DevOps teams that all total to about 20 people. And one thing that our QA leads always tell us is that the first step in solving a bug is understanding what is the expected behavior. What should this feature do? And so, likewise, the first debugging technique that we can apply to fixing the inclusion defects in technology is the principle of expected behavior. We cannot understand the problems caused by a lack of inclusion in tech without knowing the expected behavior of technology environments. Now, I have male privilege, and whether it's a workplace or a conference or a happy hour, when you work in software and you have male privilege, you get a lot of benefits from that. I mean, one benefit is that I get the benefit of the doubt when I talk about my work. And often, people who don't have male privilege, they're often questioned simply because there aren't men. There aren't men. And we often fail to see how not having male privilege often causes people to be denied the benefit of the doubt and hinders their ability to contribute to software. Let me give you an example. This is a picture of me at South by Southwest, a big conference that happens every year in Austin. And this is Catherine. And Catherine is the founder and CEO of a company called The Muse. If you know Catherine, you've heard of The Muse? Anyone in here? It's a really great site. It's a great career site. And this picture was taken after Catherine sat on a panel talking about women in tech. And Catherine recounted a story that I've heard many women are able to relate to. So she goes to a happy hour, and it's a happy hour for founders of technology companies, software companies. And it's mostly men, and Catherine walks in, and someone will inevitably turn to her and ask her, "Oh, whose boyfriend are you?" Not being given the benefit of the doubt, even questioning her position and her right to be in this place for founders, that is not the expected behavior that we should have in technology. And this is not unusual because often people of color, women, and LGBTQA people are exposed on almost a daily basis to behavior that the majority of people in tech, the majority demographic, would never expect. I mean, I think that if I walked into a happy hour for founders, people would ask me, "What's your startup?" Not, "Who am I dating?" And so the ability to see these lapses in expected behavior, that's vital to understanding how we can stop prejudging people simply because they defy the patterns we're used to seeing in tech, whether those patterns are based on gender, race, sexuality, or anything else. Everyone should be given the benefit of the doubt, no matter their demographic factors. And we definitely shouldn't judge people based on how they dress. A friend of mine is here at Puppet, and just yesterday she was telling me that she went to a conference, and she dresses casually like most people in startup culture do. And at this conference, someone asked her, "Are you a booth babe?" And she's like an entrepreneur. And so these are the expected behavioral lapses that really often make it hard for our industry to become the inclusive one that we all want it to be. All right, so the next debugging principle is tracing. Now, we all know that software programs are often very complicated. And there are times when early in development, there's not even a UI. So to debug them, we often have to write out the output to a flat file to maybe a screen. And so you write it out, and then you basically display the output as the program runs. So you may be able to trace through the program and detect small defects. Well, I want to present to you the idea of inclusion tracers, which is how do we find and detect the subtle ways that marginalized groups are often excluded from information and exposed to microaggressions by the dominant demographic. So this is a picture of a real person, but I'm going to make up a fictitious name for her. So let's call her B. And B is the only black person on the IT team at a very large and well-known tech company. And she's often encountered examples of racism on her job. And these are real stories. She once had a white male coworker who had all these stereotypes about black women. This coworker assumed that B had been abused by her parents, that she was being abused by her then boyfriend. And it's just really amazing that someone who was actually abusing B was fascinated with her fictitious history of abuse. And often, as she's had to do to other companies that she's worked for in technology, she's had to go to beer taverns and learn classic rock songs, though she doesn't like classic rock. And nothing against classic rock, she's not into it. But to play rock band with her friends, she had to pretend to like that genre of music. And just like my friend at Puppet had been confused for a booth babe, B has, when she first started the company, would always be mistaken for a member of security, not as a developer or a professional, but someone who worked at the front desk, simply because of how she looked. And she began to dress a little bit more formally so that she would be seen as someone, as a professional, based on how she dressed. And that's not something that the people at the company who had male privilege had to do. But that's often the experience for people of color in tech. We often have to lose our lives just to earn a living. Now, if someone had their inclusion traces on, they could have spotted this. For example, why assume that everyone wants to drink beer? And I mentioned that, providing other non-alcoholic options is great. And actually, Kara wrote a great post about providing that at conferences and tech events. So we have a very alcohol-based culture in technology. And I really appreciate places like what I've seen here at Pupp is that you have non-alcoholic options. And so I think that there's a movement to go against that. And so we're making progress, but I do think we do have a while to go. And also, often at companies that I visited, they play music in the kitchen or in the break room. And, why not crowdsource the playlist so that people who like different genres of music have it represented in that playlist, in those spaces? And so everyone here can step through the cultural code of your workplace and see if anyone is being excluded or hurt by it. But you simply need the willingness to pay attention. All right, so let's turn to the diversity technique of refactoring. And I love refactoring. I know that often as developers, you like writing new code, but there are times when you gotta give legacy some love. You gotta go through your legacy code base and clean it up, and maybe you're going to extract functions into different modules to make them more reusable. So we restructure the code. We don't change how it functions, but we clean it up, we restructure it so that it's more maintainable and it's a little bit more efficient. So that's refactoring. Now, inclusion refactoring is a good way for technologists to begin making technology a more inclusive industry. And this is how we improve the internal structure and design of how underrepresented groups are viewed in tech. So let me give you an example of how we can refactor inclusion in tech. A few years ago, a very prominent and well-known technology CEO described what he called the airport test. And you may have heard of this. And the airport test is a way that during interviews, this really high-powered CEO would determine, does this person fit in my company? And so you would ask the question, would I want to be stuck at an airport with this candidate? And because this was such a high, visible, very well-known founder, CEO, other people began adopting the airport test. But this is really a terrible way to hire people if you want a diverse workplace. First, how do the personal tastes of a founder have anything to do with whether this person can do the job? And second, the airport test is usually meant to determine, is this person a culture fit, right? Do they fit with the culture of the company? Well, if you have a culture of mostly white males, then that's going to make it really hard to get other people into your company. And especially when it comes to people of color, not a lot of founders in technology have ever been stuck in the airport with women of color or people of color, or often people who are LGBTQA. And so also the founder who came up with this probably has enough miles where they hang out in airport lounges, which are by definition places of exclusion, right? These are exclusive spaces. And so the airport test is a way to perpetuate a workplace that is not inclusive. It becomes even more exclusive. So let's refactor the airport test into the workplace test. So instead of wondering if a candidate would be someone fun to be stuck at an airport with, why don't you ask, how have they made their previous workplaces better, right? How have they reduced the amount of bugs that are reported after a release? Or what are some good practices that they found for onboarding someone into the team? Or how have they made it easier for developers to have time with the end users who actually will use the product? I mean, a lot of developers, we build the software, paid a lot of money for it, but we're often not end users. But by hanging out with end users, we often find ways to build better software. So let's stop trying to hire cultural rock stars. The airport test is all about I. The workplace test is all about we. So let's not have cultural rock stars, let's have rock star workplaces. And by refactoring the airport test, I think that we can get there. Here's another example of how you can refactor inclusion. Take a look at the careers page of your company. And I hope that you all do that, right? You know, I have to admit that some people have worked for a company and they have their title on the careers page, but they don't know it. And that's a very subtle clue that they're going to be escorted out the door because they're actually hiring for your position. I've seen it happen. But this is not why you should not. This is not why I'm saying that you should look at the careers page. Studies have shown that how you write your job descriptions often has gender bias. For example, a lot of studies have shown that when you have dense paragraphs of text, when you're listing the requirements for the jobs, women tend to see those dense paragraphs and not apply. And a lot of companies have gone to writing job descriptions as bullet points because it's easier to scan through those bullet points and get a better idea of whether you fit. Another set of research studies have shown that, and this is all because our culture socializes women to just think this way. Most women, if they see a list of requirements for a job, they want to feel that they fit 100% of those requirements, or they want to apply. Guess what men do? They have to meet 60% of those requirements before they apply, right? So we can refactor even our careers page by using bullet points to describe the prerequisites, but also make sure that you're very clear in what you're asking for. And companies that have done this, that have gone to bullet points and been very clear in what they're looking for, they've seen an uptick, if they're tracking this, in women applying to those positions, all right? One other simple thing that you can do is to ask how many women write the job descriptions for technical roles. Because often men are writing these job descriptions, and men, we bake into our biases into how we ask for talent. And so I think it's really important that you can do this today. You can ask, these technical roles that we have listed, who wrote these? Are they all written by men? And if so, can we find female developers to write a few or to at least review them so that we can check for bias? So that's one way that you can refactor diversity. One other thing that you can do that's really simple is go to your company website, and most websites have this, especially if it's a software company, especially if it's a startup company, and look at the Meet the Team page or the About Us page. Is there inclusion and diversity on that page, especially among senior leadership? Are there women? Are there people of color at the director level, at the C-suite level? Or does your About the Team page look like this? So these are really simple steps that we can all take to make our industries more inclusive and more diverse. All right, so the next and final technique of debugging diversity is sample code. Now, one really easy way to debug software is to see it running or something like it. And I know I've been in the case where I've been trying to write something and I'm running into some problem and someone in the next cubicle or the next office says, you know what, I have something that is actually working. Let me send it to you, or maybe a little code snippet. And by seeing a working version, by lending me that sample code, that makes my experience a lot easier. And so let's talk about the inclusion process of sample code. And you can do this and help underrepresented groups get access to information and events that normally only go to the dominant demographic in tech. And I've done this in my role as a speaker. I've been speaking at tech events for a while, and I've gotten a pretty good feel for how it works. Standing here before you is something that there's a certain approach to doing it to be successful. And getting to be a speaker at tech conferences takes a lot of work. But you can lend some sample code of how that works fairly easily. There are a few years ago, I was putting together a panel for South by Southwest, which I mentioned before. And getting a panel in the South by is really competitive. They get thousands of applications, but they can accept maybe only about 30%. So it's a really competitive process. And a few years ago, I was putting together a panel on design, And I knew that one of the key parts of getting accepted is who you have on your proposal. And there are a lot of, honestly, white men in design I could have worked with, but there is this designer that we were working with at a previous company based in Mexico. And she was really good. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to ask Anna Karen, that's her name, to go in with me on the South by Southwest proposal. And she wasn't a big name, she wasn't really well known, but she knew the technology, she knew design, and she was really good at it. And so this is actually a picture of Anna Karen and I at South by Southwest. And we put in our proposal after working for several weeks on it, refining it, and getting it ready. We submitted it, and we got in. And so Anna and I were able to submit and then present at South by Southwest. So by kind of giving her that sample code, by lending some of my privilege as a man, I've spoken at South by Southwest about 4 times. And so I was able to get her into South by. And she's actually went on the next year to submit her own panel, and that got in. And so by lending her my privilege, by lending her that sample code of how you get into technology conferences, that's been really helpful to her. And Anna Karen's gone on to be an entrepreneur and to start her own companies. And being a woman who walks into a VC office saying, I just spoke at South by Southwest, that's helpful. That gives you credibility that often you may not get simply because of your gender. All right, so I want to take a step back and talk about how this really works. Now, if you've come to this session, those of you who made the journey, and I appreciate all of you, then I'm probably preaching to the choir. And you're probably well on your way to building awareness and how you can make a more inclusive and more diverse technology industry. And the thinking and the techniques that you apply to debugging your software, like I said, I think that maps very well to enriching the community. And Luke in his keynote mentioned that community being diverse and how that's a value here at Puppet. And I think that everyone can do it. I think that we really need, like I said, a grassroots effort where individuals work. I think companies are going to put out their numbers every year and we won't see a lot of changes, but when people demand inclusion, that's when we will get inclusion. But you may be wondering, where do I start? And I think that by asking that question, you've already started. Keep asking questions. Keep having conversations. Think of these conversations as diversity pull requests. And like most pull requests, they represent how your thinking has diverged from the master branch, that you've diverged from how technology has operated for decades. So review what you've learned about how you can make technology more diverse and more inclusive. And then have conversations with members of underrepresented groups like women and people of color and LGBTQIA people. I've gained tremendous insights by just going to my colleagues in technology who happen to be women and saying, what's your journey like? What can I do to help? Just ask that question and then listen. And just by asking, they'll eventually tell you. They may not trust you at first because it's like kind of weird, this dude asking me about how he can be helpful. Is he really being genuine? But I think if you're patient, you eventually will learn quite a bit. And in fact, this talk is really my pull request to what I've learned over many years of understanding what can I do to make the technology industry that I love so much more inclusive and more diverse and open to everyone. But I want to be real with you, right? I think everyone who hears this talk can make an individual contribution to making technology more diverse. But there is no silver bullet. You can't just try 2 things and you meet some resistance and you're like, all right, it doesn't work, I'm done. You have to really commit to the work. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I want to briefly discuss the term ally, because you've heard that a lot, and an ally is a member of an advantage group that helps disadvantaged groups. The most commonly used term is a male ally, right? Someone who has gender privilege, who helps women. And I think that the term ally has benefits, but we have to realize we live in a world that is anti-ally. We can't kid ourselves that we don't have implicit biases exposed all the time through just society. I believe in the total equality of the sexes. And I often fight for getting women to technology and helping them get promoted and make sure that we pay them equal to men. But I have a subconscious. And that subconscious is fed garbage on a regular basis by society. I mean, we see it in the current election. There's a lot of garbage being fed, especially about women. And so we have to be real and realize that you can never really be a full ally. There's always going to be defects in our ability to be inclusive, and the best that we can hope is to be an imperfect but improving ally. I mean, we're always fighting against a system and our own natural biases, our implicit biases, but I think if we realize the struggle and we confront it head on, then we can always become a better ally. And that's what I try to do. I say that I'm a male ally, but I'm really an ally in process. Always trying to get better, but realizing that every incremental step that I make is an improvement. And just like our software won't be bug-free overnight, technology won't be inclusive overnight. But by working together, and I think that if we chip away at it a little bit at a time, we'll have a better technology industry. And I think one day it will be the meritocracy that we all want it to be. Now, I gave a talk at GitHub Universe in San Francisco a few weeks ago, and Common, who's a rapper, everyone heard of Common? That might be my black privilege talking. I know who Common is. And the concert was done as a benefit for Black Girls Code, which I hope everyone has heard of. And it was really amazing. Common has made a number of hit songs, but one of my favorite songs that Common does is called Glory, and it's from the movie Selma that came out a couple years ago. And he performs this song with John Legend. And the chorus from the song goes like this: one day, when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be ours. And that chorus captures the essence of why I think that diversity and inclusion work is so important. When we have a diverse and inclusive industry, it doesn't mean that women win or that black people win or that transgender people win. It means that we all win because we're working in an industry that works. We're working in an industry that welcomes everyone. We've actually seen this in every movement in our nation's history. A few weeks ago, there was this famous convention by a certain political party, and a very brave Muslim American father offered to lend his copy of the Constitution to someone. And the ACLU began to offer free copies of the Constitution to anyone who wanted one. So I put in my request, and a few weeks ago, I got my copy of the Constitution, right, which I haven't read probably since 8th grade. So I'm reading through the Constitution, and I'm like, this document actually holds up pretty well. And I then realized that the founding fathers put in a pull request system into the Constitution, right? Changes to the document that we call amendments can be requested, reviewed, and then merged back in. And it's kind of an unpleasant process, and we've only had 27 production runs so far. But I think that just like pull requests in software, right, the first version of something is usually not that great, but you learn a lot in the pull request. And you can learn a lot in the amendments to the Constitution. For example, when the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, after the long turmoil of the Civil War, that amendment is often seen as the one that freed black people from slavery. But that's not what it says. The 13th Amendment did not make it unconstitutional to own black slaves. It made it unconstitutional to own anyone. So while I'm the descendant of black slaves, and I'm sure that my ancestors rejoiced when that amendment was passed, all Americans won because they now lived in a country where everyone was truly free. And the 17th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, I'm sure half the population rejoiced at being let into the franchise, but really all Americans won because they now lived in a country where your gender was not held against you at the ballot box. It's not an amendment, but a few years ago, the Supreme Court acknowledged that same-sex marriage is just marriage and therefore should be protected. I'm sure that a lot of bisexual, I'm sure a lot of lesbian and gay couples rejoice, but really we all won because we now lived in a country where there were no restrictions on who you could love. And as a nation, we try to form a more perfect union by addressing the wrongs done to people of color and to women and to LGBT people. And I think that we can make a more perfect union by addressing our own peculiar problems in the software industry. And if we do this, if we make our industry a place where everyone is welcome, no matter who you are, I think we all win, because then we have an industry that has no limits on talent. One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be ours. Now, I'm sure that there are some of you who may be unconvinced, and you may say, you know what, I'm a Puppet guy. I like to just build my machines and roll them out, and I like to automate and get all my servers virtualized and focus on that. All this diversity and inclusion stuff sounds kind of cool, but I don't think it's really important to me. And I get that. But I think that if Leonard Nimoy, when he walked into those studio offices, and I have no evidence that this happened, but let's say if one of the executives said, what does making a science fiction TV show have to do with paying a black woman? I really hope that Leonard Nimoy would have said, it has everything to do with paying a black woman. Because Leonard Nimoy played Spock, and Spock symbolized the idea of infinite diversity and infinite combinations. That diversity by itself has merit, that there's power in embracing diversity. And I would hope that all of us, as we go throughout our daily lives, we find little ways to make it more diverse, to make where we work more inclusive and open to everyone. So as we build the art of our code, I hope that we understand that if we want LGBT people and women and people of color and other marginalized groups to not only come into technology, but stay and get promoted, if we want that boisterous bazaar that Raymond mentioned where no bug is deep, then I think everyone here has a role to play in debugging diversity. Thank you. All right. I have about 7 minutes for questions. Yeah. Sean has a roaming mic, so feel free to ask.
Hi, I'm Bridget. I work at Puppet.
Hi, Bridget.
Hi. The one thing I've been thinking about lately, Kara and other people at Puppet do a really nice job about organizing like women's groups and giving a lot of us sort of like a little place of our own, I'll say, room of our own. But I've been thinking a lot recently about, like, you mentioned transgender folks. Mm-hmm. And I guess I've been thinking, like, in software companies in particular, you know, like how can a company who, as you point out, has like C-level, a homogenous C-level, or how can like those folks start to think about who they're not and like how to build in networks and, like, you know what I mean? Like everyone
Right.
talks about the pipeline, but even once people are in, like
Right.
what's the best way, do you think, for those high-level folks to start tackling that problem?
Right.
Like how can they do it authentically?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very meaty question. Thank you. Bridget, right? Yeah. Thank you, Bridget, for that question. I think that, so my background is, I'm an agile software developer. I've been the Scrum Master for a lot of teams, so I like to be iterative. And I think you have to start small. I think some of it is if people have access to, and you're talking about specifically like the kind of C-suite level, like the CEO and the CTO.
I mean, that's like where policy comes from,
Right, okay. Right, and so, right, how do I get the people who really have the keys to the kingdom to being included, not just people who are individual contributors who are important but don't set policy? I think that I try to, when I talk to people at that level, coach them in small incremental things. One thing is having code of conduct at a conference like Puppet where you include transgender people in that description, that, hey, we are a open and welcoming place for anyone, regardless of how you present or any other factor, right? We want to welcome everyone. And I think that having codes of conduct can help a lot in doing that. And I haven't read the code of conduct for PuppetConf. I'm sure that I can find it. But I'm also a fan that when you have the CEO do the keynote, usually on the morning of day one, have that CEO refer to the code of conduct. Because if she puts emphasis on that code of conduct, and that code of conduct is inclusive, especially of people who are transgender, then that has teeth, right? If you're on stage talking about it, taking time if you in your 60-minute slot to talk about that you care about transgender people, people will notice. I think one other thing that you can do is, and I work for companies, there's usually the larger ones, that have LGBTQA working groups, right? These are groups of, they're groups that are basically meant to be safe places for people in that company to get together. And so not just having a women's group or usually a group for people of color, or having one for LGBTQA people. Most companies are getting there, but I think that that's one way to do that, to form that up and use the model of what you've done with your women's networking groups as well. But I think one other easy way that you can also get the people who set policy is to let them know there are people out there who are very powerful voices who you just follow them on Twitter. Coraline, does everyone know Coraline? I love Coraline. Coraline is a great voice for transgender people. There's TransHack that Courtney does, Dr. Courtney Ziegler, who goes by Fake Rapper on Twitter. Just say, hey, you're probably on Twitter. If you're not, you probably should know about it. Follow these people and just listen and understand. Often I know Courtney and Coraline are very open in what they go through as a transgender person and begin to understand their voices and their concerns. And I think one key thing is to amplify. And as a person with male privilege, I often find women on Twitter who I met at conferences or maybe just know through Twitter, and they rock, they know their stuff, retweet them, reply to them, highlight their work. And if the CEO is retweeting a transgender person who uses Puppet, and this person's out and open about the fact that they're transgender, that says a lot, right? That's maybe even more powerful than policy, right? That is acknowledgement, and I think that can go a long way. Does that help?
Totally. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Bridget. All right, I have 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
I'm going to stand up so everybody can hear me.
Okay. What's your name?
My name is Grace.
Hi, Grace.
And I often talk to hiring managers, directors, CEOs, and about their hiring practices and trying to reach a broader range of people. One of the most common initial responses I get is when I recommend that they look at their job descriptions and the way they go about hiring is, well, I want to find the best candidate.
Right.
What do you recommend is a good response to that?
Right. I've heard that before, and it's usually said not that nicely. They usually say, I don't want to lower the bar. And my response is, why do you think that is lowering the bar? Why do you think that by making a concerted effort to look for women, we're not saying that we should go out to the mall and then take 20 random women and then bring them to the company and pay them salaries. We're looking for qualified people. And I usually just present the question to them, why do you think that that's lowering the bar? Why do you think that won't result in a very high quality pool of candidates? And there's a lot of literature, and if you follow me on Twitter and at me, or if you want to, if you contact me on LinkedIn, there's a ton of literature that shows that inclusive companies are more innovative companies. If you have gender diversity, and usually the right mix is 50-50, who could have saw that coming? That you get better performing companies. So there is a business case for increasing the level of diversity and inclusiveness of your company. And there's all kinds of studies. I mean, I have a page on my blog that lists 20 resources that says there is value to inclusion. So it's really, how can you not do this? How can you, if you want to have a company that performs at the highest level, you really need to invest in this. And it's really then a question of, do you believe in facts? Are you going on your own preconceived prejudices? And that's really it. I mean, I think there's almost no debate that if you have, especially women, women make companies better. And there's a variety of reasons why, and companies hurt themselves when they keep women out. And the research is clear. All right, thank you, Grace. All right, I think I'm out of time. That's my time. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate your attendance.
Thank you, Anwan. That was
and
fantastic.
I'll be around for a little bit and happy to take more questions. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you.